They thought she was a criminal. They dragged her into court in chains. But what the world didn't know was that Nyah Johnson wasn't just any soldier. She was the Navy's first black female SEAL sniper. And when a four-star admiral walked into that courtroom, everything changed. The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and the sound of chains rattled across the room. All eyes turned instantly. Walking in, surrounded by two stern marshals, was Lieutenant Commander Nyah Johnson, a decorated Navy SEAL sniper. Her wrists were locked in steel handcuffs, and her head was held high despite the humiliation. The air grew heavy. This wasn't just another defendant walking in for trial. This was a living legend, the kind of soldier whispered about in military circles, the kind whose missions never made the news but changed the course of history in silence. The crowd gasped. This wasn't just any soldier. This was the first black female sniper in SEAL history. The woman who had crawled through deserts for days without food, who had held her breath in jungles for hours waiting for the perfect shot, who had saved hostages in the dead of night with only her rifle and her courage. Her name was carved into Navy history. Her medals spoke for themselves. Valor, Distinguished Service, Silver Star. She was a role model, an icon. And now, she stood accused of a crime so severe that the prosecution wanted not just her career, but her very name erased forever. Nyah didn't lower her eyes. She didn't beg for sympathy. Her shoulders remained squared, her gaze sharp, as though she were back on the battlefield. But the cold steel cutting into her wrists told a different story. For the people watching, it was unthinkable. A decorated SEAL, handcuffed like a common criminal. The whispers started, soft at first, then spreading like wildfire through the courtroom benches. Why would the Navy's deadliest sniper be treated like a criminal? Some leaned closer, straining to catch details. Others shook their heads in disbelief. To them, Nyah was the embodiment of service and sacrifice. But here she was, dragged before the judge as though her years of loyalty meant nothing. The judge glanced over his glasses, face stern, while reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Cameras clicked, capturing the shocking image of chains on the wrists of a war hero. Her family sat in the back row, tension etched into their faces. Her mother's hands trembled as she clutched a handkerchief. Her younger brother stared straight ahead, fists clenched in rage, unable to understand how the very government his sister had bled for could betray her like this. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, lips curling into a satisfied smirk. To him, Nyah was no hero. She was a soldier who had crossed the line, and he was determined to paint her as reckless, dangerous, and guilty. But the truth was far more complicated than anyone in that room could have imagined. Because what they didn't know, what the whispers couldn't answer, was that Nyah's so-called crime had nothing to do with disobedience or betrayal. It had everything to do with a mission so dangerous, so secret, that even the people accusing her had no idea what she had sacrificed. And as Nyah stood tall in that courtroom, wrists bound, she knew one thing for certain. This trial wasn't just about her future. It was about whether the truth would ever be revealed. The judge's gavel slammed. Order in the court. The sharp crack echoed through the room, but the tension didn't ease. Every seat was filled, and every person leaned forward, eyes locked on the decorated Navy SEAL sitting in handcuffs before them. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man with a smug smirk, rose slowly, deliberately, like an actor stepping onto a stage he believed he owned. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and pointed directly at Nyah Johnson. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "This woman may wear a uniform, but she has betrayed the very country she swore to protect." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled faster. Flashbulbs sparked from the gallery. He turned, pacing before the jury. On foreign soil, during an operation that required precision and discipline, this officer went rogue. She disobeyed direct orders. She acted on her own, and in doing so, she crossed the line, no longer a soldier serving her nation, but a vigilante serving her own judgment. The words landed like blows. To the casual ear, it sounded damning. A A soldier who disobeys orders is a soldier who can't be trusted. The prosecutor paused dramatically before delivering his final strike. She took out a high-value target without clearance. Her actions could have sparked an international crisis. Heroes follow the law, ladies and gentlemen. Traitors break it. His smirk returned as he took his seat. For a moment, silence. Then Maya's attorney, a weathered man with a steady voice, rose. Unlike the prosecutor, he didn't strut. He didn't need theatrics. His strength was in his calm. Your Honor, this is not a story of betrayal, he said firmly. This is a story of sacrifice. He stepped closer to Maya, placing a hand on the table as though to ground his words. My client followed her instincts. Instincts honed through years of training. Instincts that have saved American lives time and again. On that mission, she didn't act out of arrogance. She acted out of duty. She prevented a disaster the likes of which none of us in this room can even imagine. And for that, she is being punished. The crowd erupted into whispers. One woman in the back whispered, "She saved lives?" Another man hissed, "Then why is she in chains?" The judge hammered his gavel again. Silence. There will be silence in my courtroom. But the silence that followed was not calm. It was heavy. Heavy with doubt. Heavy with suspicion. Heavy with the realization that maybe, just maybe, the government wasn't telling the whole truth. The spectators leaned in, unable to look away. Their eyes darted between the smug prosecutor, the resolute defense attorney, and the unshaken soldier who sat in chains but still carried herself like she was standing on a battlefield. Who was telling the truth? Was Maya Johnson a hero or a traitor? The tension was suffocating, the kind of silence that makes your heart pound in your ears. And yet, no one expected what was about to happen next, because the trial had only just begun, and the most powerful man in the Navy was already on his way to the courthouse. Maya stood silent as the charges were read. She didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't even look at the crowd staring at her. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was defiance. Every accusation that rang through the courtroom meant nothing compared to what she had endured on the battlefield. She had faced enemies with rifles aimed at her head. She had crawled through the mud with bullets flying inches away. She had carried wounded teammates on her back while explosions shook the ground. This courtroom, with its polished wood and echoing voices, was nothing compared to war. But Maya also knew the truth. Courts didn't run on honor, courage, or sacrifice. Courts ran on politics. Her family sat trembling in the back row. Her mother held a folded handkerchief, pressing it tightly against her lips as tears welled in her eyes. Her younger brother clenched his fists, jaw locked in rage, every muscle in his body screaming to stand up and defend his sister, but powerless to act. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, recording every movement, every expression. Cameras flashed, capturing images that would soon plaster across headlines. Decorated seal, faces, court-martial. Hero or traitor? The air was thick with whispers. Quiet, buzzing voices that rose like a swarm of bees. Why would they bring her here in chains? She saved lives overseas. I read the reports. This doesn't feel right. Something's off. Then, suddenly, a voice broke through the murmurs, loud, passionate, unrestrained. She's a war hero. Why are you doing this to her? The shout ricocheted off the walls. All eyes turned toward the middle row, where a veteran in a faded Navy cap stood, trembling with fury. His weathered face was red with anger, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen combat himself. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order! Order in the court!" he roared. His face flushed with irritation, but it was too late. The damage was done. The whispers became bolder now, louder, like a wave sweeping across the room. People weren't just watching anymore. They were questioning. They were doubting. Because deep down, every single person in that room knew something was wrong. The facts didn't add up. The image didn't match the story. Why would the Navy's most decorated female sniper, a pioneer in her field, suddenly be branded a criminal? Maya lifted her chin, refusing to let the chains drag her spirit down. She didn't need to speak. The truth was written in the steel of her eyes. And then, just when it seemed the tension couldn't get any thicker, The heavy courtroom doors creaked open again. The sound of polished shoes striking marble echoed across the chamber. Slowly, heads turned toward the entrance. Conversation stopped. The buzzing whispers died into silence. Whoever had just walked in carried a presence so powerful that the air itself seemed to shift. And in that silence, hearts pounded with anticipation. Because everyone could feel it, something was about to change. The sound of polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. Heads turned one by one. The room fell into absolute silence. Entering the courtroom was Admiral Richard Hayes, one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire Navy. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This was a man whose very presence commanded respect. Hayes was known as a strategist, a leader, and as someone who rarely left Washington for anything less than a national emergency. And today, he was here. The prosecutor's smug confidence vanished in an instant, his smirk melting into a nervous swallow. Even the judge, who had controlled the courtroom with stern authority, straightened in his chair like a schoolboy caught misbehaving. The admiral didn't waste a second. He walked with steady, deliberate steps, his gaze locked on Nyah Johnson. Every footfall against the marble echoed like a drumbeat of judgment. "Remove those handcuffs," he commanded, his voice deep and unshakable. The marshals froze, eyes darting nervously. One stammered, "Sir, the defendant." Hayes cut him off like a blade. His voice thundered across the chamber. "That's not a defendant. That's a soldier who has done more for this country than every man in this room combined." The words struck like a cannon blast. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically. The spectators sat stunned, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The marshals hesitated for only a second longer before obeying. The metallic clink of the cuffs unlocking rang louder than any gavel. Nyah slowly rubbed her raw wrists, but her eyes never left the admiral's. There was no fear there, only recognition. Two warriors who had shared the weight of impossible decisions. "Admiral Hayes," the judge began cautiously, clearing his throat, "you have no standing in this case." But the admiral cut him off with a glare sharp enough to silence a room full of generals. "Then consider this my testimony," Hayes said firmly. His voice rose with righteous fury. "I was the one who gave Nyah Johnson the green light on that mission. Without her, hundreds of lives, including my own officers, would have been lost. She didn't go rogue. She carried out my orders. And now you're trying to crucify her for doing her job." The room erupted in murmurs. The quiet buzz quickly swelled into a storm of voices. Some gasped, others whispered furiously, and the reporter's pen scratched even faster. The prosecutor's face drained of color. He fumbled through his papers, suddenly exposed. His carefully crafted accusations, the narrative he had built brick by brick, were collapsing right before his eyes. For the first time, Nyah lifted her chin and looked directly at the man who had tried to break her. She didn't speak, but her steady gaze said it all. The judge, visibly shaken, hammered his gavel, but it was useless. The balance of power had shifted. The trial was no longer in his hands, because Admiral Hayes had spoken. And when a man of his rank and record spoke, the nation listened. The courtroom, once buzzing with doubt and division, now sat frozen in absolute silence. You could hear the faint scratching of a reporter's pen stop mid-sentence, the shuffling of feet die away, and the heavy breathing of men who realized the ground beneath them had just shifted. The admiral's words carried more weight than any lawyer's carefully rehearsed arguments. He hadn't just defended Nyah, he had exposed the truth. The mission in question hadn't been rogue at all. It had been top secret, highly classified. And Nyah Johnson had not only been chosen for it, she had been the only one capable of pulling it off. Every eye in the courtroom turned back toward her. Not with suspicion now, but with awe. The prosecutor scrambled, shuffling through his notes like a man watching his empire collapse brick by brick. His voice faltered as he tried to speak, his earlier bravado evaporating into panic. "Your Honor, I object. This is highly irregular." But his words sounded hollow. like a child whining against a storm. His arguments, once sharp as knives, now collapsed like a house of cards in the rain. The judge, who had sat tall and confident at the start of the proceedings, now shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His gavel slammed again and again. "Order! Order!" he barked, but there was no longer any order to restore. The truth was already out. Everyone knew it. The case was finished. Admiral Hayes turned, his every move carrying the weight of command. He stepped toward Nyah and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. His voice, low but resolute, carried across the silent courtroom. "You don't belong in chains. You belong back in uniform." For the first time since stepping into that courtroom in shackles, Nyah spoke. Her voice was steady, calm, and commanding, the voice of a leader, not a prisoner. "Sir," she said, her eyes unflinching, "I don't need medals. I don't need recognition. I just need the truth to be told." The Admiral gave a slow, respectful nod, and it just was. A hush lingered for a moment longer. Then, with visible resignation, the judge sighed. He knew there was no legal foundation left to stand on. His voice was weary, but his words were clear. "This court finds there is no basis for these charges. Lieutenant Commander Nyah Johnson, you are free to go." The words echoed like liberation itself. The marshal stepped back. The prosecutor slumped in his chair, defeated. And Nyah, no longer bound in chains, rose to her feet. She stood taller than anyone else in that room. Not because of her uniform, not because of her rank, but because she had faced the storm and walked out stronger. As she made her way toward the doors, the crowd that had once doubted her rose to its feet. First a few claps, then more, and then thunderous applause that shook the walls of the courtroom. Even those who had once called her reckless now stood, unable to deny what they had just witnessed. Courage, loyalty, and strength in its purest form. And from that day forward, the story of the black female SEAL sniper who walked into court in chains, but walked out a hero, spread across the nation. It wasn't just a story about a trial. It was a story about truth, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of a soldier who refused to be silenced. Before we continue this powerful story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, so you never miss stories that will inspire, shock, and change the way you see the world.